Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Tay if you're new here. Today I'm going to be going through my tips and tricks to breastfeeding. If you missed my breastfeeding essentials video, I'll actually have it linked above, but today we're actually going to take a deeper dive into things like how to have nursing stations set up, the different things that I did to increase my milk supply, and just some things that I learned about breast milk storage and feeding and just the day-to-day of breastfeeding. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I actually want to get into is just how difficult breastfeeding actually can be. It's something that is very different for every single person. So the things that worked for me might not work for you. I'm hoping that even if they don't work for you, they can kind of lead you in the direction of something that does work for you though. But just know that if something that I say doesn't work for you, that's okay. You're not doing something wrong. It's different for everybody. I have been breastfeeding my daughter exclusively for almost a whole year. Her birthday is at the end of the month, so about 11 months. And honestly, really, since the first 3 months, it really hasn't been that difficult of a thing for us, but those first 3 months did have their difficulties. When you first have your baby, you actually will not get your breast milk right away. Typically, you have what is called colostrum, which is like a sticky, darker in color substance that you also have a lot less of. You have drops of colostrum, typically. Sometimes it's a little different. I did not get my milk until the second day that I was home with my daughter. So she was like three and a half days old when my milk finally came in. And I didn't really notice it in the hospital that much. I'm assuming it's just because I was so tired and there was so much going on. But the first day at home was probably one of the hardest days of my entire life. Not just because of breastfeeding. Obviously, I had just had a baby. I had a newborn. It was my first baby. But it was super difficult because I wasn't producing any milk and I just felt like she was starving. She wanted to be on me all day. I was super sore. I wasn't making any milk, but obviously this is normal. Babies' stomachs are super small when they're first born, and so this isn't something that was different, crazy different. If my milk wouldn't have came in when it did, I probably would not have been able to make it another day. I genuinely just felt like I was failing her and that she was starving. So just know that it's hard. It's very difficult. And then even when my milk came in, she was feeding for 45 minutes at a time. We were both learning how to do it, and so it was a very rough first few days, but it was very much so worth it in the long run. I absolutely love breastfeeding now. Obviously, I still am doing it. So next thing that I wanted to mention is my top recommendation for you would be to talk to the lactation specialist at your hospital. If your hospital doesn't have one, I would find one. I took a breastfeeding class while I was pregnant, and it was an online class because they weren't having in-person classes at the time, and the class was sort of helpful, but really what I would recommend is after your baby is born to then have the lactation specialist come in and do a one-on-one. I thought that I was doing fine when we were in the hospital, getting her to latch and correct positions and stuff. And then once the lactation specialist came in, I realized that I could be doing it better. So even if you think that you've got it down, I would just highly recommend that you have them come in and just kind of walk you through their recommendations. You don't have to do all of what they say. I know that my lactation specialist recommended the football hold for me instead of holding in front of me, and I absolutely hated that. So even though it was her recommendation, I didn't necessarily do it. However, she did have quite a few other tips that were really helpful for us and did make it a little bit easier in the long run. Another thing that I would also recommend is that if you are struggling after you go home, reach back out to them. Even if you talk to them in the hospital, or even if you didn't talk to them, if you feel like you need help, just go ahead and reach back out. I'm sure they'd love to help you. There are also a lot of mommy groups online that will help you out with questions or concerns, or even just somebody that's going through the same thing that you're going through. The next thing that I would like to go through is if you are pumping, and you most likely will end up having to pump, whether it's because you want to do bottles or just because you're engorged and you need to get some of your milk out. You should keep your breast pump in a insulated bag. So this is actually just a lunch box that I had, and I recommend this just because it keeps all of your stuff in one place, and then also once you've pumped, it's insulated, so you don't have to worry about keeping it in the fridge or anything like that if you're out and about. You can just do it all right here. The next thing that I would highly recommend is that in your house you have a breastfeeding basket or station. I actually just used this basket that I got at Marshall's, and in it I kept breast milk bags. I kept my pump in it when I was at home, the bottle attachment that went to the pump. I also kept like the extra parts for my breast pump in here. I kept a bottle because there were times when my husband was feeding my daughter that I would go straight from the pump to the bottle, and it was nice to not have to get up. A burp cloth, and nipple cream. I'm sure at other points in time there were odds and ends in here, but that was typically what was always in there. And it just helped to always have it all contained and always close, so that I didn't have to go grab a handful of things if I wasn't going to pump in the same place. It was just all in a basket that I could grab and go. I did not pump for that long. I honestly absolutely hated pumping. I pumped once or twice a day for the first 3 months, I think. I think I made it 3 months. And I'm not gonna lie, if I was exclusively pumping, I would have quit breastfeeding probably at the 3-month mark because I hated it that much. So do with that what you will, but I hated it. Another thing when it comes to pumping is when you actually store the breast milk, especially when your baby is young. These bags can hold up to 8 ounces, but I do not recommend putting 8 ounces in there. You will use more bags, obviously, but I recommend when your baby is first born, maybe do 2 or 3 ounces in one bag. Then as they get older and they start eating more, then you can do bags that are filled with more milk. I recommend this because once you thaw out the milk, you can't refreeze it. You have to use all of it up, and especially for us, we were only doing 1 bottle a day, and even then she didn't really take a bottle that great ever. She doesn't take one at all now, but we wasted a lot of milk because we thawed it out, and then she didn't go through it fast enough. So that's why I just highly recommend just having some bags with not that much milk in it. That way you can thaw it all out, and that whole bag is just like 1, maybe 2 bottles, and that way you're not wasting any of your milk. Another thing that I wanted to mention that I did not know before is that breast milk can have really weird tinted, like color tints to it. There were a few times that I pumped and it just looked like really, like almost like lime green, or just a very weird color. So obviously I Googled it, and according to Google, milk can be like green, blue, purple, super yellow, like all these weird colors, and apparently that's normal. You might want to do a little more research, because as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, we're good. And so far everything's been fine, but just wanted to mention that because it kind of freaked me out the first time that my milk was green. Next, I want to talk about things that I did to increase or maintain my milk supply. There have been times over the last year that I've noticed that I haven't been producing as much, especially when I was pumping every day. It was a lot easier for me to tell when my milk supply was dropping, and there were times that I did like power pumping, which is where you pump for a extended period of time. So like I would do like 10 minutes, and then I would wait like 10 or 20 minutes, and then I would pump again for 10 minutes. Again, I hated this. Not that I think anybody probably likes it, but I just really hated it. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, when I was overproducing milk, one of the things that I did to kind of stabilize my supply is that I would only pump until like the pressure was gone, or until like my boobs didn't hurt anymore. And then I would stop. So I wouldn't worry about getting like a certain amount out or like pumping until they were empty. I would just say, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes on each side or 10 minutes on each side or whatever I needed so that they would feel better. And then that really helped stabilize. I was never overproducing for an extended period of time or really underproducing for an extended period of time. I'm sure that that advice is not going to work for all of you, but that's just one thing I noticed. Another thing is that there were times when one side was producing more than the other. What I did in that amount of time, or during those times, is I would use the pump, and I would do, on the side that was overproducing, I would only pump like the bare minimum, so that I wasn't like leaking or engorged or anything. And then on the other side, I would pump it until it was empty. Or if it was Aurora, there were a lot of times that she would drink both sides in one feeding, so I would have her just drink on one side for a couple minutes and then do a really long time on the other side, and then that kind of helped them stay even. I would highly recommend that you do that, because I do know people that have not done that. They said, okay, this one's overproducing, so I'm just going to let her eat out of this one, and then like one side has dried up completely. And that just, if you want to breastfeed for an extended period of time, it's just, obviously that's not sustainable. It's not going to work well. Your one side's going to be really sore. I mean, honestly, they're going to look lopsided, and it's just going to be a no-go. So I'd highly recommend trying to keep them as even as possible. Some things that I did nutrition-wise to keep my milk supply up is that I increased my protein, my fiber, and my water intake. I didn't do that the best way. Obviously, the best way would be to eat like whole foods and all that stuff, but when you're first postpartum, you're really not going to feel like cooking that much. You're just not. So to make sure that you keep healthy, nutritious things in your body, I actually did a lot of protein powder. I used these Vega proteins. They're proteins and greens. I am not a chocolate person, so I have vanilla. And then I also have the salted caramel, which the salted caramel is by far my favorite. I would do protein shakes when I could, but I also really liked to put the salted caramel one in my coffee. And then the vanilla one I would actually put in oatmeal. I also have this Ritual essential protein that's actually made for pregnancy and postpartum. Obviously, this is not necessary, just wanted to make you aware that it's a thing, and it does taste really good. It is vanilla. So yeah, definitely putting them in my coffee and my oatmeal really helped me keep my protein up, because if I just had to do protein shakes, I definitely would have failed a lot of days. For fiber intake, I actually would do Metamucil. It's actually something that I would drink before I had a baby, so it was just really nice after. For fiber. Obviously, drinking water, I really liked to put liquid IVs. Strawberry is by far the best flavor that they have, period. But I would drink those. Just having flavor in my water helps me drink a lot more. But doing those three things really helped me. Like if I noticed that my supply was dipping and I didn't feel like pumping, I always tried these things first, because these things were more enjoyable to me than the pumping. The last thing is the postpartum vitamins. I did do a little research on what is different about these than the regular prenatal, and really the way that they market it, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but they market this as more, there's different vitamins that you need to go into your breast milk than the vitamins that you needed when you were actually pregnant. So they've just swapped out some of those so that it's more catered to your body when the baby is not growing in you anymore. So I know it's not super detailed, but I'm not a doctor, so you can do more research on that if you like. Once again, if these tips don't work for you, I hope that you find something that does work for you. I absolutely love breastfeeding. There's some days when I say like, okay, like I'm done. I'm not gonna breastfeed anymore. I'm gonna start weaning. And I always said that I would go to a year, but we have like 2 weeks until she's a year old, and I have no desire to stop breastfeeding. And if you feel differently, then that's fine. Like I said, everybody has their own opinions and their own journey. I just know that it's definitely worth it to me to push through the beginning that was just really, really hard. If you have any other questions that you think I could answer, if you could just leave them in the comments, I'd be happy to help. If there's something that you think needs to be in another video, I'd be willing to do that as well. But right now, those are the only tips that I have.